this is the final presentation, so we've almost made it through, but now we're going to talk about cloud, and I hope you're all excited about this topic, because I am, surely. So I want to share some of that with you. So the cloud market in Europe is a really interesting one, because I think there are some very specific trends for the European market, and as I said earlier, it's not really this anonymous place where data is stored and companies are just using it, but it's really about understanding all the different nitty-gritty details of cloud contracts. And I think European organizations are getting better at it, but it also just got much more complicated with the safe harbor ruling and the looming European data protection regulation. So it's an interesting one, and I want to show you some of the insights that we have here in Europe. So first of all, I want to show you how we segment the market. So we define 5 types of cloud, ranging from the self-run private cloud over here, you can barely see it, but then over to the managed private cloud, which is still on-premise, to the dedicated private cloud, which is a hosted environment, and then to the virtual private cloud, which is already in the public cloud, but it's a dedicated instance, all the way over to the pure public cloud, if you want, which is an all-shared environment. So these are the 5 types of cloud that we define at IDC, and that we track and that we research. Of course, the topic of the year has been around hybrid cloud, and you don't see hybrid cloud here because it really means it's a combination of several of these cloud types. So customers are using, usually if they've built out a private cloud, then they want to extend into the public cloud, but we still count that as 2 separate kind of cloud use cases, if you want. And we haven't sized the hybrid cloud market because it will fall in one of these 5 categories, the cloud usage. So this is, these are the cloud types, and then it's also very important to have like a very strong software layer across these 5 cloud types if you want to achieve hybrid cloud, so that you can dynamically move workloads between on-premise infrastructures to a service provider or even to the public cloud and then back again. So there's also a requirement for a very strong software layer that helps you with managing these different workloads. But as you can see, try to give you some sizes here on how the market looks like. So it's a 30 billion market in Western Europe, or in EMEA. And it's, there's a lot around the investment around private cloud. Infrastructure, so the private cloud services market, which contains the hosted private cloud services, is the biggest category, or subcategory if you want. Then we have the private cloud hardware market, plus the private cloud software market. So this is all the private cloud infrastructure or investment that is going into building out private clouds. And then we have the public cloud market over here, where we have software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And software as a service is clearly the largest share of public cloud. So that's more than 60% of the public cloud market is software as a service. And that is also what we've seen over many years. That's usually where companies start. You know, they want to acquire an application that they feel they would much rather have from the cloud than install on-prem. And Salesforce has been one of the leaders of the market pushing companies to outsource their CRM systems to cloud provider. They've really kind of paved the way to the public cloud for many organizations. But now, of course, many other companies are following suit, and every independent software vendor that we talk to, they have developed a SaaS strategy, or in the process of developing a SaaS strategy, and it's actually quite challenging, especially for the smaller ISVs, to actually kind of cloudify or cloud enable their software. So if they have developed a very good on-premise software many years ago, now they have a really strong requirement to both cloud enable that software, but also mobile enable that software. And that's a real challenge both for large and small software vendors, so that they are relevant for the third platform, but especially for public cloud. In the second largest bit is the infrastructure as a software market from the public cloud, and that is really probably the most relevant segment today, because we are talking about the data center, and this is really spending or workloads moving from on-premise IT into the public cloud. So that would be into the infrastructure as a service portion. But then the interesting one I think in the future will be the platform as a service market, because this is really the market segment where companies can create quite some stickiness with the customer. Some would even say lock-in. But if you choose your development environment, that's really a long-term decision, because it's really hard to move from one application development environment to another one. So this is really one of the areas where we see that this will be a strategic decision for organizations, which platform whether to use. But it's really also the opportunity for cloud providers to create these higher value services, to really ensure that the customers are staying with them, and to make money off the cloud. Because the infrastructure as a service space is a very competitive space, and it's really hard to earn money in the pure infrastructure as a service. So if you are just selling compute or storage in the cloud, it's a very competitive business, very difficult to earn money. Especially because we have the big providers looming, and that was the question in the very beginning, right? Will there only be 4, or is there room for more? I think there is definitely room for more, but they need to differentiate. So they need to offer more than just the pure compute or the pure storage. They need to maybe offer some paths, so some development tools. They also need to highlight that they are a local provider, and they need to build these local relationships with organizations in order to have some differentiator, because they will never be able to compete on price with Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or the big guys. So they have to differentiate somehow if they want to survive. But as Giorgio said, we have this enormous long tail in Europe, and we believe it will stay there, but only if they know how to differentiate. Then there's also the market of selling public cloud hardware into the public cloud, and that's what Silvia showed as the ODM market, basically. So that is, of course, also like a $2 billion market opportunity. And all these numbers, they come from IDC trackers. So we have a public cloud tracker, and we have also a cloud infrastructure tracker that covers both the public cloud and private cloud hardware side of this. And there were 2 questions, I think, so sorry. You want to go?
My question is the traditional outsourcing business included in these figures, or is this something completely separate?
No, I think that's in the private cloud services market. So because all the traditional hosters, they've done some cloud washing, and now they're hosted private cloud providers. So that's included in the private cloud services market. I mean, that's not all the outsourcing, but that's the private cloud related outsourcing or infrastructure related outsourcing. And what we see is that the outsourcing market is actually declining, and has been declining for the last 2 years. And also our forecast is that the outsourcing market will continue to decline. So we don't expect that it's going to rebound, but we think it's on a continuous declining curve. But of course now the traditional hosters, they are trying to reinvent themselves and to create different business models, to become these kind of cloud integrators, and become the sticky point where they help customers to use different cloud services, plus some hosting, plus some on-prem, and become integrators instead of just pure outsourcing partners. So they are also reinventing themselves in order to stay relevant.
Of course, we are in Germany, so it would be very interesting to see a breakdown of those numbers into the European countries.
For Germany, yeah.
Because this is EMEA level, right?
Yeah, that's EMEA level, yeah. I mean, EMEA is more than 80%, or Western Europe is more than 80% of the EMEA market. So EMEA is like the SEMA region, and so Middle East and Africa is rather small portion still, but of course, then we have the 16 European countries, right? And it's very different. But surprisingly, even when I talk with IT executives in Germany around cloud, then the first reaction is always like, no, we don't use public cloud. But then we talk about it, and then, oh yeah, sure, we use this and we use that, and yeah, but it's not business critical, and yeah, of course, over here we also use some. So they are actually using it. So usage in Germany is much higher than the sentiment suggests, I would say, and that's very interesting, and makes it quite hard actually to get to the right numbers, because if you just take it at face value when they say no, we don't use it, then you actually get the wrong picture, because actually organizations are getting more savvy to understand where it makes sense for them and which workloads they can put in the cloud. And the interesting, or the really crucial point for European organizations, but German ones in particular, is understanding the data that's going to move to the cloud or not moving to the cloud, and understanding the regulation that governs the data, because that's really the key for the decision, can I move it to the cloud or not. So if they have strong data governance, if they understand what data they are dealing with, then it's much easier for them to choose a cloud service and to be selective about the workloads and the data that they are sending. Whereas if they just say, oh, we have this huge amount of data and we don't really know what it is, it's really hard for them to actually use the cloud. But then there are all these business initiatives as well that are driving towards the cloud, right? It's all the line of business departments from marketing or finance or HR that are really pushing for cloud solutions. So a lot of the cloud buying is actually driven by business users, not so much by IT, probably. And IT has really the job now to say, we are an advisor to the business and we really help them to make the right choice if they should move to the cloud or not. But only if they get involved, right? So it really depends on the standing that they have internally if they get involved in that decision. Because in the worst case, it's after the fact they get involved, right? When they say, oh, we want to integrate the cloud data with our on-premise data, it doesn't work, can you help us? And then they find out that the move to the cloud has actually happened.
Have you made any, let's say, research on how many companies do have a cloud-first strategy?
Yes, yeah.
The IT department?
We do a large survey once per year, which we call the Cloud View Survey, where last year we surveyed 933 companies across Europe, and this year it's going to be actually even more. And we asked them about if they have a cloud-first strategy or not, and it's a rising number. It's actually quite a few organizations now that have a cloud-first strategy, also in Europe. But then there's of course all the legacy IT still, right? That's and what we see is, and I'm actually have a slide on that. Maybe I think in 2 slides I'm going to talk about that. So, can I
Sorry for the interruption.
No worries. It's great with the question.
My question was a little related to his first question. Do you see any differences, for example, of cloud adoption in Germany, or especially versus France and UK, for example? Are we behind here in Germany, or?
No. Actually, when you look at the numbers, we're actually not so far behind. Maybe slightly to the UK in priority. Yeah, because I think we were slow to start, but I think we've caught up because people understand the concepts much better. They are much more savvy about which workloads they can move, and they use cloud where it makes sense, right? Where in the beginning it was this mad rush to the cloud, and that's not usually what German organizations do, right? They evaluate, they test, and then they make a move.
You're not known for innovators. Yeah. And the second question would be, I mean, we often had in Germany the issue of security, especially in the SMB space.
Yeah.
Are we overcoming this hurdle now, or are they still a little bit reluctant, especially in the SMB space?
I mean, in every survey that we do, security is the #1 reason for not to move to the cloud. But actually, still today, oh yeah. But it's a lot about perception. Because I bet you that every SMB, their security is not as good as any cloud provider.
That's not the question.
No.
I guarantee you, every public cloud is much more secure.
Exactly, yeah.
What they're doing, but
yeah.
You're right. Perception is.
It's perception versus reality, right? But I think once you have the dialogue, then they actually understand that they are always on the back foot when it comes to security, whereas the cloud provider, they are betting their business on the security. So if they have bad security, they will be out of business the next week. So they have to be good. They have to be really innovative around security and stay at the forefront and invest in the experts that an SMB cannot afford, right? So I think, I mean, for me, it's very clear that the public cloud for the serious providers is much more secure than any on-premise mid-sized organization can ever be or make their on-premise IT. But the perception is still there. What I own and manage is more secure in my premise than anywhere else.
I mean, security has different flavors. One of them is as well that they don't want that any American, special institute wants to have access to it. Right. That's one of the reasons why SoftLayer, for example, and AWS heavily invested in data centers in Germany. Mm-hmm. And do you think, have you seen from the data that those companies make more revenue now in Germany than before, so that this really significantly changed the market?
I think it has, right, Giorgio?
Yeah, I think yeah, certainly yes. I think, and actually that was one of the things, going back to the question of Germany and cloud, and just confirming what was discussed so far. Actually, at the end of 2013, we made a prediction for 2014. The prediction back then was that 2014 would be the year for cloud in Germany. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but really what happened in 2014 is that several of these companies, including VMware, Oracle, AWS, SoftLayer, and many more, Salesforce, actually opened facilities in Germany to make sure they could overcome at least some of the problems, or some of the perceptual, but some of the real problems they had in terms of data control. So I think, yeah, we saw a little bit of improvement certainly there. And I think what we see now, like Carla was saying, the security, even in Germany, the security question is becoming less of an excuse now not to do things. It's becoming more about, okay, I have the security issue, how am I going to face it, how am I going to deal with it, and then how am I going to move forward.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, the question is still, if it's a US-owned company, you know, will they still maybe give my data back to the US? There's still this kind of looming skepticism around it. So that's why I think there's still a place for European local service providers, because they can say, well, we are European-owned. And I think they can use that to their advantage right now. But I think it's a short window of opportunity, because we said that as well after the NSA scandal. We said it's a clear window of opportunity for European-based service providers, and they haven't really taken advantage of it to the extent that we thought. So now they have a second chance, you know, to exploit this in marketing context. But we'll see if it works. But also another point, when we ask about which security issues are you most concerned with the cloud, then data leakage is the number one, and by far. I think it was more than 60% said data leakage, and then the second most raised point, I think, was around identity and access management, and that was only 30%. So they understand in more detail what are actually the security challenges, but data leakage is the biggest concern, clearly. Okay, so moving on, this is the vendor view, and what I want to show you here is to say that we're really seeing a radically different picture evolving if we look at private cloud or public cloud. So who's leading in private cloud, who's leading in public cloud, right? So in private cloud, you have the traditional companies that also that traditionally sell on-premise infrastructure, like HP, Cisco, IBM. They're leading the private cloud market. And if we look at the management software layer that I put up earlier, it's also IBM, VMware, Microsoft. So already here there's a slight shift, because if you had talked about just system management software a couple of years back, it would have been CA, BMC, IBM up here. But now VMware and Microsoft, because the virtualization layer is so important for cloud, and both VMware and Microsoft have invested into the next layer of management around on top of the hypervisor layer. That's why they have taken so much market share and growth in the cloud management software market as well. But then if we look at the public cloud, you have the SaaS. It's dominated by Salesforce, SAP, and Microsoft at the moment. And this is, by the way, it's 2014, because these are the latest numbers we have for the full year. We are going to have the new numbers next week, but unfortunately it's too early. So then we will have the first half 2015. And this market is very volatile, right? So this is changing quite quickly. But so this is these are the best numbers I have today, unfortunately. But then on the platform as a service market, Amazon, Microsoft, and OpenText, they acquired a platform as a service player, GXS, I think they were called. And then infrastructure as a service, you see Amazon, Orange, and IBM. So IBM SoftLayer, right? So they are currently leading. But then if you look at who's supplying the hardware to these public cloud vendors, you have ODM leading, but then Dell and HP also selling quite successfully into the public cloud hardware space. So this is a snapshot of the vendor landscape, but you can see the movement, right? So when we talked about the data center market 5 years ago, would have only been the organizations on the right-hand side, I guess, of this chart. And then and now we have all these new vendors coming in, and they're really taking share as spending moves from on-prem to public cloud. Right? So we will see a new wave of leaders emerging in the data center space because of this move to the cloud. But then what I want to just briefly talk about is that IT infrastructure is increasingly being designed for the developer as the primary user of infrastructure, right? So before it was really IT infrastructure was designed to give the best operational efficiencies, to operate with the 4 nines, 5 nines, 6 nines reliability and all the enterprise features. It was really optimized for the different workloads. But what we see now is the shift towards the developer as the primary design point, if you want. And developers, they have taken the way that AWS provides infrastructure really for themselves, and that they really like it. And that's also how they want to access on-premise infrastructure. So I think the developer will really become the new design point for infrastructure, and that's a very interesting shift. And so we expect a 10 times increase in applications in the next 3 years. These are primarily mobile applications, but also, for example, IoT applications. So we will see all these IoT applications being developed. And the interesting thing is that we see a strong emergence of industry platforms. So companies who used to be in manufacturing or in healthcare or in pharmaceuticals, once they have made the shift to become actually a software company, in addition to the traditional products that they were developing, they realized, okay, we were the first ones in our industry that created this great platform where we develop our own applications, and they want to monetize that platform and become the new platform players for their own industry, which is a very interesting trend. And there's some famous quotes, for example, from Jeff Immelt from GE that says, if you were a traditional manufacturing company yesterday, tomorrow you will wake up and you will find out you were actually a software company. And we see that happen in really many organizations that we talk to, where they say, okay, we produce whatever tools, but we also have started a software business in our organization, because we understand that we need to develop these applications and we need to enhance our products and services with mobile applications, web applications, in order to provide a better service to our customers. So more and more of the traditional brick and mortar manufacturing, healthcare companies, they actually become software companies. And that really changes the way how they look at infrastructure and how they design infrastructure for the future. And the design point is the developer, and that's through APIs. So they want to have this software-defined infrastructure, or they want to access infrastructure through APIs like they do with AWS or other public cloud services. This was the slide that I referred to your question earlier, is to say that mainly the new applications are actually moving to the public cloud, or to the cloud, whereas the legacy applications, they still remain mainly on-premise. So we see a huge move of all the newly developed applications that I talked about on the earlier slide. They are primarily being developed in the cloud, not so much on-prem, or in a combination or in a hybrid cloud mode, right? And they might be taken back on-prem once the application have really become business critical, but they start typically in the cloud. Whereas the legacy applications, for the longest time, I think they will remain on-premise, or they will move very slowly, also in a hybrid fashion, to the public cloud. So we see these two different patterns for the traditional applications that have been business critical and remain business critical in the future, and then all the newly developed applications. So these are like interesting trends, I think. And then just to talk about open source, because I think open source becomes also, or gets a very interesting new role in cloud, especially when you think about OpenStack. You can see that. Oops. Oh, that's strange. So, I'm going to tell you what's on the slide. I'm not sure why it doesn't show. Or you could guess what it says. 50% of European organizations think that OpenStack is very important for their cloud strategy moving forward. And that is from the big cloud survey that I mentioned earlier. 38% of European organizations think that Docker is very interesting and important to their cloud strategy. And 38% also think that Chef and these other provisioning tools are very important to their cloud strategy moving forward. And I think these are the tools that will be used in these hybrid cloud environments as companies are building out their on-premise private clouds, and they want to federate or burst into public clouds. These are the tools that they are evaluating. So we also see the shift from proprietary to open source for the management tools. So my recommendations quickly. It's really about understanding applications much better, because they will dictate, if a workload goes to the public cloud or not. And infrastructure will really become much more application aware. And you've heard it in previous discussions as well, that it's really the application that kind of designs or gives the design points for infrastructure. So we see, especially with hyperconverged, but also with software-defined storage, we've seen that these products are targeted, for example, at the virtualization administrator. They're not targeted at storage administrator. So if you want to say that virtualization is a workload, then we already see a lot of solutions that are application aware for virtualization environments. But we will see that's also going to be the databases, will be the web scale applications, mobile applications. They give the design point for infrastructure in the future. So it's not infrastructure just optimized to run efficiently. That's still of course necessary, but it's really infrastructure optimized for workloads. Then I think infrastructure really needs to cater to the likes of developers. And right now, of course, the big theme there is around DevOps. So how do you integrate the demands of developers with the need for running a reliable infrastructure? And DevOps is really one of the models that is currently very popular in the industry on how to kind of marry these two different requirements together and create one end-to-end process that ranges all the way from development to IT operations. And then the third one is that really to think about IT should be a service, both internally or externally. So this whole shift in mindset that came from cloud services to this as a service model is really happening now in organizations. So even internal IT should be as a service or delivered as a service or provisioned as a service as well. Yeah, thank you.
May I disagree on point one? So I would say that the infrastructure will not become industry and workload specific. It should become industry and workload agnostic, so that there is no dependency between the workload or application and the infrastructure underneath that, that you can move it around independently from the hardware. That's my take on point one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that as well. And I think we've seen a trend for some years to say we want to have one infrastructure that works for every workload. But what we see right now is actually quite a fragmentation, because we see all these innovative solutions coming to the market, and customers right now are buying per workload and not so much.
It's not a good thing for my friend.
It's not a good thing, but it's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
It's maybe not the most efficient way of buying infrastructure because you're building silos again. But right now, I think the drive to buy the best infrastructure for specific workloads is a bigger driver than the need to have one unified infrastructure. And I think we go through these cycles, right? You have centralization, decentralization, we go through these, but we also see this trend towards standardization and now best of breed or specialization. And I think it's also a wave, that we see every so often happening. But then it's also around, API-enabled infrastructure. I think that's also one of the points in point one. But it's interesting times. I mean, it's okay. With that, I would like to open it up for questions. The last round of questions.